Brew Day here at BrewFanatics TV, and today we're going to be doing an all-grain batch of an Irish red ale. And what we have set up is we're going to try to experiment a little bit to play around with some of the parameters of the brew process and see if we can predict the impact on the ultimate flavor of the beer and really increase our knowledge of how all the stuff you do while you're brewing impacts the ultimate flavor. What we're going to do today is split a small batch of grain into two parts and do two different mash temperatures, and then do two different boils and put both of those into two different fermenters with the same yeast and see if we can perceive any difference in the mouthfeel or the alcohol flavor or that sort of thing with our Irish red when everything's all said and done. So a quick run through our setup here. We've got the water that we'll need for the boil and for the sparge for rinsing the fermentables out of our grain before we boil it. And we took an extra step of putting a little bit of gypsum in there. Here in this area, this time of year, the brew will benefit from having a little bit extra calcium that we get from the gypsum in there. So all our brew water is here. We've got the grains for each of the two mini batches that we're using ready to go. And then we're actually going to mash on the stove in a couple of kettles so that we can have greater degree of control over the temperature change. If we need to add a little heat or let it cool down, we can do that more easily on the stove. And then in a little bit we'll show you how to rinse the grains and get your wort and boil it and put it to bed. Okay, you can see our two mash pots that we've got going. We're trying to do two separate temperatures. One at the lower range, the temperature range, that's good for those carbohydrate type enzymes. So we heated up the mash water in this one to about 158 degrees, knowing that when we put in about 2 pounds of grain with the 2 quarts of water, that the temperature then would drop to about 140. We wanted to have about 140 degree mash temperature. And we want to have about 150, 152 degree mash going in this other pot. So we're going to heat the same amount of water, a little over 2 quarts, to about 168, 170 degrees. Then when we put in the rest of the grain, about 2 pounds of grain, then we should see the temperature drop to about 150 or 152 degrees. And then we'll maintain the temperature of each mash by adding small amounts of heat as we need to.
I didn't hear about that most important ingredient that you were holding on to there.
Oh yeah, this is the Belgian Saison that I made last summer. I still got a little bit left. Springtime's coming, and it's a nice refreshing beer.
All right.
I'd like to do another one this year and really fine-tune the recipe, so maybe you'll see some more of that on Brew Fanatics later in the year.
Right on. And I went with the Listermann's actually Wild Pale Ale.
Or the Wild Mild Ale.
I'm sorry, Wild Mild. Yeah, my bad, Dan. Wild Mild Ale, pretty good.
And of course, don't forget to keep a cold glass of water on hand in case you have to dump it into your boil and prevent overboiling. It could really save you from a lot of mess.
Okay, we've been mashing for a while, and now we're ready to see if the enzymes have done their job and created enough fermentables to have a decent wort and give us the beer we want. We've got two little containers here for a bit of the mash from our low temperature mash and our high temperature mash. And with this bottle of tincture of iodine, we can do a quick test to see if the starch has indeed all converted or not. So come on close and we'll take a look and see what we see. As we're taking a look at the starch conversion test, you see very dark conversion on both, which indicates that not all the starches have been broken down sufficiently yet. So it just means it needs a little bit more time. We'll let it rock and roll a little longer, test it again in about another 15 minutes. There we have our high temperature mash, and it's just slightly changing color, indicating that we may be getting close. You can see some of the purple there around the rim of the iodine. Still some unconverted carbohydrates that it's reacting with. Hopefully it'll just be a little bit longer before we can rinse the grains, pull our wort together, get it in the fermenter, and let the yeast go to town. Alright, there we have it. No color change. And we're ready to go on this first batch. You don't want the sparge water to be too hot.
Yeah.
Because if it's too hot, it'll start to leach out compounds that really add a lot of astringency and a different kind of an unpleasant type of bitterness. It'll start to leach out tannins and things that just, unless you're trying to get them out, you don't want them coming out into your beer.
Okay. And what temperature is that now?
I don't know, but the recommended temperature for sparge water is about 170.
170. Alright, so we got our sparge water up to about a little over 170 degrees. Since we're doing two separate batches, smaller batches, we don't have the big setup with a Gatorade jug to sparge our grains, so we just dump the sparging water back into the first batch, and then we're going to try to do the actual sparging through an individual 5-gallon bucket that has a little filter at the bottom.
The water that Dave mentioned that we put into the mash, we're just trying to stir and get all of the soluble fermentables into solution now, so that when we separate the grains from the water, then what will be left is our wort with plenty of fermentables for the hungry. Low temperature mash, just doing an iodine check here, and we're still seeing a little bit of purple show up in the iodine, although it's much decreased from our last test. I think we'll give it about another 15 minutes, and then we should be ready to separate the grains from the rest of the liquid. Okay, this is the first time we've ever tried a mini batch like this, but we've got our normal lauter tun with a bunch of holes drilled in the bottom with a 5-gallon Home Depot bucket, and we dumped the contents of our pot in there, and now we're just slowly raising it up to strain all the liquid away from the wort in our boil pot. Now there's a good likelihood that the wort is going to be really cloudy with a lot of the grain dust, and that's just the thing we're going to have to deal with. So we're going to go ahead and boil it like normal, add our hops like normal, and then just try to do an extra good job of letting it settle at the end of the boil before we siphon it off into our fermenters, and thereby try to improve the clarity of what right now is a pretty cloudy wort.
Alright, so for our lower temperature mash, we've got our sparge water ready to go. It's up to a little over 170 degrees, so we're going to go ahead and dump that in and sparge these grains.
This is our first time doing two separate single-gallon batches, so we have to get a little creative with our sparging, but improvising is definitely part of the fun.
This is the low temperature mash, just trying to stir in the sparge water, get all those fermentables into solution, and we'll separate the grains from them and boil it, and batch number 2 will be ready.
Wort. Alright, so we got our second batch here, our lower temperature mash, and we dumped the sparge water into that bucket, and then just used a little strainer to actually let that water run through the grains and get all the fermentables out. So it was kind of our backup plan, because we couldn't actually fit that bucket that was straining everything for us into this